on May 11th, 2015, we get this raid in the pharmacy. You know, FBI, NCIS, all these people. And when the cops came in, they said, "This guy's screwing you over, Mr. Carter." My father, he was getting older, had a pharmacy since 1955, kind of struggling. He brought a consultant in to talk to me about working with him. I took that over and we grew that. We were doing oxygen. We were doing all types of different things. He had 2 pharmacies in 2000. When this situation occurred, we were in 22 states and had 145 salespeople. I had a doctor call me, and he called me and says, "Greg, I'm sending you a prescription, but it's getting filled from somebody in Orlando." So I said, "That's kind of odd. Why would that be the case?" "I don't know." So I made some calls, and I called this company called eFax. And I called them, I asked who owned this number. It should be mine, you know, Carter's Pharmacy. And somebody else owned it. So one of my sales directors actually somehow commandeered the number. And all the scripts that were coming in at that point in time were coming to him, and he was sending them out to other pharmacies. So he must have had a beef with me or something, I don't know. And that's when I called my attorneys to say, "Hey, this guy's getting information. He's not a provider. The law says that I have to report it to the authorities to see if he's using the information that he's getting for identity theft purposes," which is exactly what we did. I just fired everybody the next day that worked for him. He was a marketing director. I had 12. He was one of 12, and his team. I terminated all of those people, and then on May 11th, 2015, we get this raid in the pharmacy. You know, FBI, NCIS, all these people. So they took me in a room. I said, "Let's see, everybody's in this room because I called the authorities in," which is what I was required to do by the law. And everybody knows that crooks call the authorities when they're doing something wrong, right? And they just kind of looked at me. I said, "So I'm gonna need an attorney." I knew attorneys, and I called the one that was supposed to be the best attorney in Jacksonville, and he could not work with me. So he got on the phone and called Larry Turner Kozlowski here in Gainesville. And Larry agreed to take the case. So I came down here, I met Ron, Caleb, and Larry Turner.
We got involved right after the search because, if I remember right, he didn't really have any reason to believe he was the subject of an investigation until the search at his business. So we knew this was going to be a long-term thing. We realized there was just a lot of information out there, a lot of documents. We knew it would take a while. We didn't think it would take 6.5 years to get to trial, but we thought it would take a while. We did our own investigation, and what we found is that by the time the government got around to really getting serious about prosecuting the case, we had come to understand that we were, I think, pretty far ahead of them in terms of gathering information and having what we needed to defend Greg.
They asked a lot of questions because it's like anything else. The attorneys can take your case or cannot. So they have to agree to take it because they're going to have to put a lot of energy and all behind it. They thought I was telling the truth, and I felt like they were very detailed individuals and they had a passion for what they did, which is really what you want.
Greg was the most confident person throughout the entire process. 1, that he had done nothing wrong. 2, that everyone would see that he had done nothing wrong. And 3, he was more confident in us than we were, just because we know the uncertainties, but he had an unwavering confidence throughout the entire process.
You don't want a Walmart attorney, okay? You got one at bat. You don't want to be saying, "I wish I would have paid extra." You're facing 30 years in jail. You don't want a what if this or what if that. So you're always trying to prove yourself out. And you either plead out to the government, that's an option, not for me, but that was for some people, or you take a swing with 12 jurors, and if you didn't do anything, you should be able to prove that. And that's what we did with our top-notch team.
We met with the U.S. Attorney and all the agents investigating the case several times, 3 or 4, and offered whatever assistance we could offer while still helping our client. We protested for years that Greg didn't commit any crimes. They didn't believe it. But over the course of that time, we established, like we try to do with everybody, we established a pretty good relationship with them, with both the agents and the attorneys. So when the time did come, they had promised us that before sending people out to arrest anybody they got indictments on, that they would give us a heads up at least. And they were honorable, and we find that when you're respectful, usually people are honorable. And I got a call the morning that they were out arresting other people.
I think it was November 18th, 2019, 5 o'clock in the morning, I get a bam, bam, bam on my door. I open up the door and there's cops everywhere. And they handcuffed me from my wrists to my feet, chained my feet. I live in a gated community right in my front yard. Treat me like the biggest drug dealer you ever met. Put me in the car and took me to the federal courthouse.
I got a call from both the U.S. Attorney, Assistant U.S. Attorney, and from one of the agents to tell me that they were out arresting people and they wanted to give us the opportunity to have Greg just present at the courthouse for initial appearance, and of course that's what we did.
We were meeting for a long time. It took them 4 years. They were almost running out of time to arrest us. And they arrested me, my top sales guy, and then the marketing director that I fired and his sales manager. That was who was arrested. That was November of 2019.
He was charged with 3 different things. He was charged with conspiracy to commit healthcare fraud, which can be done in about 100,000 different ways. All that's telling us is that they believe he agreed to submit some fraudulent prescriptions for reimbursement. He didn't even have to do it. We don't necessarily know who did it, just that they believe he agreed to this. And then the other 2 counts in the indictment said that his company paid an employee, so he was guilty of a kickback, but there was nothing saying what that payment was for. There was no paper trail surrounding that payment. It was just a generic, well, you paid one of your employees, so you're guilty there. And then the third thing, he was accused of money laundering based on the corporation he owned paying him his salary. So just a transfer from corporate checking to personal checking became money laundering in their eyes. So we didn't really know, how is this money laundering? What is it that they think is so illegal or nefarious about this? And that was the case with all 3 counts that he was facing, is we just don't know what they think he did that's bad.
Federal defense and federal criminal prosecutions are just on a different level from state prosecutions. Almost everything takes longer. They're much more thorough. The agents are more sophisticated. The attorneys are more sophisticated. The courts are much more structured. And everything is done at just a level or 2 above. So in federal court, you really have to redouble your efforts to gather all the information and to be on your toes at every moment, because you can trust that the other side is doing a pretty good job because they're good at what they do, but that means that you have to be doing a good job and you can't just wing it.
In this case in particular, because it's a white collar case, you just have a lot more documents. It's less about live testimony and it's more about the documents. It's a matter of who knew what as it was being done. So in other words, the crux of the trial issue was, is Greg or was Greg complicit? The way you prove that is primarily through documents. So the difference of a federal trial like this versus a state trial is just that paper trail and knowing the depth of the paper trail.
I can't even tell you how many interviews, dozens of interviews with potential witnesses, with employees of the pharmacy. We talked to the lead agent investigating it, went back and forth with him about information. Once discovery started coming from the government, and it was thousands and thousands and thousands of pages, we had to catalog that, go through that, weed out the wheat from the chaff, and figure out what was important.
This is a case where we were given 6 terabytes of data from the government. We had hundreds of thousands of prescriptions that have been written, and it's our job to know each and every one of them. So my role was to be the documents guy, if you will. When somebody was to mention a specific document or a person in trial, my job was to immediately pull up everything that we know about that person and have it on the ready.
We had to develop a whole database of facts, of documents that showed what we thought would be important to Greg's defense. So we gathered up everything we could, cataloged it, put it in a database, so when the time came, we had information at our fingertips to refute whatever was thrown our way.
Because we had gotten involved so early, we had such an advantage over any of the other 7 people that got indicted in this case. Instead of having to digest all 6 terabytes of information in a 1-year span, a lot of this was old news. A lot of this was stuff that we had uncovered in our own investigation. A lot of this was information that we had been able to digest bit by bit over the last 4.5, 5 years. And so there was just kind of a natural, almost osmosis, if you will, where the information is just permeating into the core of your memory, to the point of when we're going to trial, we had just had the opportunity of the time to familiarize ourselves with everything to the point of it's top of mind awareness, just recall instantly where it was.
One of the things you do, and that we did in this case, is we kept looking for the smoking gun, because you always have in the back of your mind the thought, there might be something out there that we don't know about that's going to come to light and surprise us. We kept looking for it, waiting for it, and of course it never came because it didn't exist.
I was very confident the whole time because I thought the whole thing was just kind of not a joke, but just a bullying tactic by the DOJ. And I had faith in the people in the jury and my guys to deliver the message properly, and we would meet every night. And we would actually talk before each day, you know, the different attorneys and us, to talk about if this happens, this, that. So nothing. And then the preparedness of Ron and the staff, man, they had everything. Caleb had everything on a computer. If somebody said something, he could pull it up right then and say, well, this is what you said to the investigator before. So we had a first-class team, and they operated as such.
You hold out hope that you can find a way out, but we had talked to the government enough. We had not really negotiated it because there was nothing to negotiate per se, but we tried to explain our perspective, our point of view, and they wouldn't agree. So by the time the indictment came, it was pretty apparent that there would be a trial because Greg hadn't done anything wrong, and there was no reason to plead to something that he didn't do.
When they opened the trial, the attorney said, y'all are here because Mr. Carter called the authorities in because he thought something was going wrong. That's why you're here. And then one of the guys actually knew one of the alternative juries. He said, we knew you all were innocent the first day. The other people, they weren't sure what they did, but they felt they were guilty of something, the ones that were found guilty, the ones that I fired.
There was one moment where one of the government's witnesses gets called to the stand, and he seems like an honest fellow. It seemed earnest, it seemed like he was telling the truth. And the government kept trying to get him to talk about how bad everything was, and he never would cross that line. And then finally it gets to the point where the government asks him a question, and the government's own witness in trial looks to the lead case agent, points his finger at him and says, and you remember I told you I have all this evidence for you to come get, and you never came and got it. And so in front of the jury, in this federal criminal trial, we just have the government's own witness destroying their credibility that they have done a thorough investigation and uncovered the truth. We've got their own witness who is telling everybody when he wasn't asked that the government has just taken a theory and run with it regardless of what the facts are.
You got one shot. I felt confident, super confident in these guys. Okay? One of my biggest concerns was letting them down, to be quite honest with you, because they put so much into it and all, and you know, you get real tight, but I mean, they really were into the case. And I think they're probably like that in all their clients, from what I can tell. You know, we knew each other almost 7 years, so you really get into it and all. But they were very passionate about what they do.
When Greg got on the stand, he was on the stand for about an hour one day and then the morning the next day. And there was immediately a sense of, oh no, this is not going well. And it wasn't because he was saying anything bad or admitting to anything. It was just because of his attitude and the sheer level of confidence that he was exuding, that he hadn't done anything wrong, he had done everything smartly, and everybody else is just, a loser, basically. So within a couple of minutes, we saw that this is turning into a train wreck.
Well, they would talk with me, ask questions, we do some role playing. The first day, I was on the stand for 3 hours. I didn't come across to them the way that they wanted me to. So after that, then we had, dinner and said, you need to try to do this, do that. So the second day, I think they'll tell you I did better.
Thankfully, we were able to, after the day ended, kind of pull him aside, have a conversation, explain to him what he couldn't see about himself. He's lived this for 6.5 years. The amount of frustration he had pent up, the amount of probably anger even that was built up of just having to go through this, and even if he wasn't scared for himself, being afraid for his family. I think he was more concerned about how other people would be affected if he ended up being convicted than himself. And so once we were able to kind of get through that with Greg, and he took the stand the following morning, we were able to present the flip side to the same coin of, you have the pent-up frustration, but then you also have the sadness of being put through this and trying to do everything right and having your business closed down because of what other people do. And then you call in the cops and the cops arresting you. I mean, we were able to really round out the picture so that the jury got a full image of who is Greg Carter.
They were all planning next steps, all of them. Ron and my team, they were kind of the leaders. Everybody was kind of going off of what they said. In the trial, it was kind of like my trial. We had all the witnesses. And so nobody else brought a witness of the 4 defendants. And they said, well, why should we? Your guys got it all covered. So that tells you how much they thought of our team.
We had a really interesting set of closing arguments. The way it works is the government goes first, they do their closing, then we give our closings, then the government gets a rebuttal, and they split it up between 2 lawyers so that one person did their opening part of the closing, and then a second lawyer did their rebuttal.
So our closing argument was essentially that the government, in our mind, was wrongly accusing somebody and had gotten all the way to this point. But most of what it became after that was, to the jury, nobody got up here on the witness stand and told you that they ever heard Greg Carter do anything wrong, saw Greg Carter do anything wrong, didn't even know of him doing anything wrong, third hand. That you didn't see any documents indicating that he had done anything wrong. It was pretty straightforward, going through the evidence and saying, forget what they might have just said, think back at the evidence, and the evidence doesn't show you what you're being told now. And the jury knew. They were there for a month. They were attentive. They were a great jury. I mean, and they paid attention and they saw and they knew.
And the person that came in and did the rebuttal part of the closing was this very, very young prosecutor. She had been a state prosecutor most of her career. I think she had been with the federal government for less than a year, or maybe around there. But her presentation was remarkably devoid of facts. It was just an attempt to inflame the jury that there's a whole lot of money that moved, so everybody here is guilty. Which is kind of contrasted with the approach that we took, which is, let's go back to the evidence. Let's look at what this case was about from the get-go, and we walked through every single person that took the stand and summarized their testimony.
The prosecution's closing arguments were largely a restatement of what they'd been saying all along from the inception of the case, and they just never came off of that. And despite us trying to get them off of that, they just kept coming back to the well and simply sort of ramping it up and trying to make it sound worse than even they initially did. So no new facts, no new evidence, just trying to make it sound worse.
The deliberation was honestly probably the most agonizing part for me. It's the part where there's nothing more you can do. Now you're just living with the internal turmoil of, did we do enough? Of, I should have done this better, I should have done this different.
They only deliberated Friday afternoon. We came back Monday afternoon. They had a verdict.
They started deliberating on Friday and later in the afternoon. And I think they came out and asked, they sent a question out to the judge, which we all got together and came up with an answer that the judge provided. And then the judge gave them the opportunity to continue deliberating into the evening and night if necessary, or to go home for the weekend and come back on Monday. You've got a jury in the other room with Greg's fate in their hands. And you know, one of the things that happened is we all gathered in a big jury room in a different courtroom because we had 4 people on trial. And some of them had family there. Not Greg, he didn't bring his wife into that, but some of the others did. And we really saw sort of what we know about the difficulty and the pressure in a case with innocent clients, because the families were so distraught, and they were much worse than the people actually on trial, because they were just a little bit removed from it. And that was really difficult to watch. I actually removed myself from it a little bit because it was making me too tense. But it didn't take long. It was, I think, about an hour and a half on Monday before they came back and had a verdict, and which we thought was way too quick for a couple of defendants and just about right for a couple, and it worked out for us.
The first guy was convicted, and they go in 4 order. I was second, and then it was like not guilty, but she did not want to say that at all. And then JC came up, and he was not guilty, and the last guy was guilty. So everybody was happy, but more relief, I think, for them than me, because I had a lot of confidence in them, just the way that they worked, and looking at the jurors, how they did things, and you know, just all the dynamics. It's really interesting. I mean, you don't want to lose and spend 30 years in jail, but it's quite interesting to see all the dynamics going on there. We had dinner at downtown. I bought them all dinner. I bought them all dinner last week, because it's been about, or last month, it's been about a year last month, October 18th. So, you know, we just celebrate.
As much as he didn't want to admit it was hard, and I think he still won't admit it was as hard as it was, it takes a toll. It takes a toll on somebody. Their business is decimated, almost ruined, only because he's so resilient. He was able to keep it going and now get it back up.
The worst time was when you got arrested till you ended up getting trial. That's almost 2 years, and you get this negative press out here by the, you know, the news media and stuff. Now, my business went up 15% because the people that know me, they got mad too. I'm like the Boy Scout of my industry. At the very end, Ron and then we all drafted a release to go that route, and it got picked up. And so when people search your name, they'll search, you know, Greg Carter indicted, but then they'll say Greg Carter acquitted, and that kind of thing. There's a story. But I haven't had any negative repercussions. When you're going through trial, it's good to have the confidence in your team. And you could just see how much better my guys were than these other people. My guys are trying to tell these other attorneys, here's what you should do. You know, they were like the quarterback. Here, you're gonna play this card, and then you play this card, and we'll follow up with this. It was really good, the way that they did it. And they looked up to these guys. The other attorneys looked up to Ron Kozlowski and his group.